Hello. Well, this is, one of these days I'm going to get a camera that does one of these auto cue things that I can actually read straight off the auto cue or whatever it's called. So I can actually look straight at the camera and it looks as if I'm looking straight at you instead of looking to the side, because I don't have a script or anything. It looks a bit weird that I'm looking here when I should be looking there. But then, anyway, I'm waffling as usual. This is my 11th book that I wrote. Again, somewhere around about 2010, 2011. So it's without reading the whole thing again, it's I have to rely on my increasingly failing memory. But it's the story of it's set in Tilbury, which is just down the road from me, in 1923. And to anybody who's familiar with some of my work concerning Edith Thompson, the year 1923 would be relevant, and that comes out in the story. And the heroine, she's a herbalist, and it's about explosions and herbalism and murder and an awful lot of other things which are nasty and complicated. And other things. It's a thick book. It's about 120,000 words long. And I think the AI voices have done quite a good job in giving a good view, an overview of the book. And again, I'm waffling. I do like to waffle because I don't have a script, and I'm terrible at this. Because as I said before, I'm a writer, not an orator. So I'll just let the voices get on with it. Bye.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are setting our stage in the early 1920s in the Thames-side town of Purfleet. It's a location whose history is, well, it's as layered as the mudflats that define its border, really.
Yeah.
Our mission, and it's informed by a pretty rich stack of personal papers and family accounts, is to navigate a narrative that fuses local tragedy with some pretty ancient secrets.
And we're talking about much more than just a historical snapshot here.
Right.
We're really dissecting the lives of patients in the Harrison family,
Yeah.
focusing in on this brutal 6-month period in 1923.
Right.
The sources reveal a kind of chain reaction involving, well, accidental death, the resurgence of, frankly, sexually transmitted disease, suicide, a descent into madness, spiritualist intrigue. It's quite a list.
It is.
And finally, the unmasking of a deep historical family betrayal. We're talking poison and murder.
It's such a tight, almost suffocating narrative, isn't it? Which is exactly why we're taking our time today to really unpack it for you. We are diving into a world where a quiet, local herbalist's knowledge is both, well, a source of healing and, terrifyingly, a mechanism for unforgivable violence.
That's quite the contrast.
It is. It's a place where a respected, retired seaman's grief turns into this frantic public psychosis, and where the darkest secrets are only saved by, well, the accidental eavesdropping of a postman.
Yeah, that detail is incredible.
This deep dive will offer you not just the facts, but hopefully the unsettling psychological landscape of Purfleet at that specific time. Okay, so the anchor point for this whole story is Patience. She's the local herbalist, right? It's a trade she inherited from her mother, Hester. And she is far from being some kind of simple village witch figure. Her vocation was, well, it was a matter of life and death, backed by real effective knowledge.
That's the crucial distinction, I think. Patience wasn't just relying on folklore or something. The source material actually lists specific, technically quite accurate remedies she used. Well, for example, for patients suffering from rheumatoid arthritis and maybe muscle spasms, she relied on birch leaf juice, which, contains known anti-inflammatory salicylates.
Right. Okay.
And she often recommended celery seeds for treating muscle spasms, which is a remedy rich in phthalates. Those are muscle relaxers. So her practice was this blend of inherited wisdom and, effective phytotherapy.
And her commitment to this practice is really where our deep dive opens. We find her engaged in what the chroniclers call the rare harvest, an effort driven by just immense local urgency. The subject of her vigil was this devastating injury to a local boy, a young rigger in training.
Yeah.
He'd suffered a severe, deep burn to his right hand, his dominant hand.
And for a working-class boy in Purfleet back then, that injury was potentially catastrophic, wasn't it? It could severely diminish his employment prospects. Patients really understood the gravity of that.
Absolutely. So the required remedy was this herb known locally as squirrel eye, or sometimes squirrel's mouths. Right. And its rarity is just paramount to understanding the stress patients was under. The sources are incredibly specific about this.
They really are.
Yeah.
It only flowers for a single 24-hour period. And that crucial window is only available during a 3-night time frame once a year.
Once a year.
Yeah. This scarcity turns the hunt into a race against time. It's almost like a primeval task, but conducted in the modern age.
We know this herb was incredibly valued, apparently used for deep burns right back to Roman times. But you have to imagine the setting for this desperate task. Patience is waiting in the cold, smooth-flowing Thames water, moving, only 10 feet or so from the unstable, changeable, muddy shoreline.
Exactly. And she's spying toward the misty Dartford salt marshes, lit only by a gibbous moon.
That detail, the gibbous moon, it feels deliberate in the sources, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's just past full, visually reflecting this period of, maximum anxiety and stress for her. She's feeling the cold grip of the water, the sharp stones, that primeval black mud between her toes.
Oh.
This scene establishes patience not just as an herbalist, but as a kind of warrior, really, fighting against time and nature to save this boy's future. The sources constantly use the landscape to mirror the inner turbulence of the characters. It's quite effective.
And the landscape of Purfleet itself is vital to understanding these families. It sits right on the London Road, linking Grays to East London. The housing area where our protagonists live, Cannonade Row, it's described as an eclectic mix of styles across 3 centuries, starkly called poor quarterage.
Yeah, that term used by the chroniclers, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the local infrastructure, housing that was, acceptable maybe, but functionally insufficient and often overcrowded.
And the people themselves, they developed this distinctive, identifiable character. They were slightly isolated, perhaps, by the marshes and the industry around them.
Yeah, the sources give this fascinating physical description. They note a tendency toward well-padded upper bodies, longish heads, weighty noses, sometimes described as jelly belly shaped, which is quite vivid, and swarthy complexions with thick dark hair.
And their speech patterns were just as unique, weren't they? Reflecting generations of this, quite insular community.
Definitely. They would apparently tear their R's, drop their H's, and, as the source rather wryly puts it, play havoc with their THs.
Right. Yet despite this working class identity, there was this fierce local pride, demonstrated vividly by their love for gold and silver adornments.
It's an interesting sociological detail that this pride, this need for visible status symbols, it apparently extended even to the local ruling class.
Really?
Yeah, they share the same adornments and tight social circles, largely, it seems, out of fear, the fear of descending to the commoner level.
So this constant social tension, this closing of ranks, it kind of creates the perfect insular pressure cooker, doesn't it? For the tragedy that we know is about to unfold within the Harrison family.
Precisely. It sets the stage perfectly.
Okay, so to understand the intensity of the coming conflict, we really have to look at the volatile foundation Patience was living on. Specifically, her stepfather, John Harrison. He was the quintessential seafaring man, wasn't he? Apparently circled the globe an estimated 25 times before he retired.
Yeah, and the sources say the only place he ever truly felt peace wasn't in a house at all, but moored on his small vessel, the Portman.
That says a lot. And his history is just steeped in this delayed grief. His first marriage to Margaret, who he often called his true love, lasted 29 years until 1910.
Right, and the sources give us that heartbreaking detail. Margaret was struck and trampled by runaway Shire horses near the Royal Hotel in Purfleet. Just awful.
And because Harrison was navigating the Indian Ocean at the time, Well, that tragic news didn't reach him until his vessel docked back at Tilbury 5 months later.
5 months. Imagine. Navigating the open sea, completely unaware that his life back home had just shattered. That level of disconnected trauma must have, well, profoundly shaped his ability to cope with grief later on, you'd think.
Absolutely. Then, 10 years later, a restless widower, he met Hester Merriweather down in Plymouth in 1920. At an inn he likely chose for its rather suggestive name, the Cock and Bull.
He sounds like quite a character. Despite his age, he was 52, and apparently being quite certain he wouldn't remarry, Hester's charms prevailed.
And Harrison quickly took Hester and her, described as willowy, 14-year-old daughter, Patience, under his protection, which introduces the next key player, Harrison's son, Bram.
Ah, yes, Bram. An absolute physical specimen, apparently.
Huh.
A giant of a man at 6 feet 8 inches tall, 23 years old. He was a lock for the Greys rugby team.
6'8".
Yeah, possessing such presence that the sources describe him as almost a Newman in Purfleet.
That term, Newman, it's fascinating here, isn't it? It doesn't just mean a strong man. It suggests he was seen as this sort of semi-divine, powerful, almost mystical figure within the community.
A symbol of local masculine prowess, definitely. But interestingly, this powerful figure preferred building ships to sailing them. He'd successfully navigated away from a miserable apprenticeship to become a respected shipwright.
And Bram was also highly motivated financially, it seems. He secured number 6 Cannonade Row, thanks in part to the, well, generous and locally frowned upon nepotism of his father's friend, Reverend Featherstone.
Right, which apparently blocked other eager local couples from even bidding. Bram worked tirelessly, often securing extra contracts for painting and varnishing local crafts for substantial, though undisclosed, sums.
And the sources detail how he managed this extra work, don't they?
They do. He utilized the free dry dock facilities of a man named William Bill, an incredibly wealthy, thrice-divorced international diamond courier from the Isle of Man.
A diamond courier, wow.
Yeah. Bill apparently allowed Bram full access whenever Bill was away on his constant trips. This arrangement, free access to vital, expensive infrastructure, was the key that gave Bram and Patience their, quote, persistent and incorruptible economic stability.
That stability was important because their marriage in 1922 was, well, it was a product of necessity, wasn't it?
It was. Patience became pregnant about 1 month along, the sources say, and they married on a hot August day. She was just 16, he was 21.
And for a time, Bram apparently openly adored Patience, sort of displaying his trophy wife. But the sources are pretty clear. After just 2.5 years, that infatuation had already faded into indifference, leaving a stable, yes, but emotionally quite distant partnership.
Yeah, the foundations were perhaps not as solid as they looked financially.
Right. Now we accelerate into the dark heart of 1923, starting again with John Harrison. Retirement had definitely not suited him.
No, not at all. He was deeply restless, prone to melancholy, and the sources specifically note his increased drinking around this time.
This mood drove him to go fishing with Reverend Featherstone, who, recognizing his friend's decline, deliberately broke their long-standing unspoken rule.
Which was?
Avoiding personal talk on the river. Featherstone spoke his mind about Harrison's state.
A sign of concern. The very next day, Harrison went over to Featherstone's vicarage, Rose's, apparently seeking the comfort of rum and chess.
But instead, he stumbled right into a criminal act in progress.
Yes. Lee, a traveler father, and his 9-year-old son, Cathmore McFadden, described as a little monkey, and the eldest of 3 were attempting to steal lead from the vicarage roof.
And the whole scenario was just primed for disaster. They were using a stolen ladder that was, well, catastrophically defective. It was missing the 7th rung and had a broken 12th rung.
Just asking for trouble. When Harrison yelled out, "Hey, you!" the father, Lee, panicked completely.
Right.
He released the ladder as if it were, and this is the source's phrase, hot lead.
Oh, God.
Cathmore, who was 20 feet up, fell to his death. The sources state he mercifully closed his young blue Catholic eyes. Harrison reacted instantly, disarmed the father, confiscated a knife.
A knife as well.
Yes, before the police arrived, and took Harrison off to Gray's for his statement. This event, so tragic and fast, really sets off Harrison's mental decline.
And the sources immediately bring in a critical piece of evidence here, don't they?
They do. A secretive witness, who was later revealed to be the postman, Harry, provided invaluable objective testimony. It fully supported Harrison's claim of innocence regarding the fall itself.
So Harrison might have caused the panic, but it was the father who released the ladder.
Exactly. This objective account protected Harrison from immediate criminal charges, though obviously the trauma remained. hugely.
And the father, Lee.
Completely distraught. Collapsed into shouting oaths, largely unrecognizable because he apparently dropped partly into his natural language, Shelta.
Shelta?
Yeah, for the listener, Shelta is the language traditionally spoken by Irish travelers. Its use here really highlights the isolation and desperation of the father, cementing his separation from the Purfleet community. This tragedy was the initial seismic shock.
But the second devastating blow followed incredibly quickly. Patience, now 8 months pregnant, walked over to Bill's yard to check on Bram. She heard this massive sonic boom breach, described as being like a 12-pounder artillery shot, followed by immediate chaos among the workers. A friend of Bram's apparently violently blocked her view, but the shout confirmed it. He's dead.
Just like that. Bram, 23 and in his prime, was crushed under Bill's huge 37-foot sloop. The massive Danish mocker, as it's called, had slid off its wooden stocks. They'd simply disintegrated under the immense tonnage.
God and patience.
Immediately hysterical, held back in what's described as a dusty, violent scuffle by the massive, beefy wives of the dock workers. Harrison arrived from Featherstones, completely stunned and entirely detached, it seems. He had to be led away by the Reverend.
The tragedy of Bram's death, it's compounded by the subsequent official finding, isn't it? The inquest later ruled Bram's death a verdict of self-neglect.
Yes.
Given that specific detail about the old wooden stocks disintegrating under the boat's tonnage, that verdict feels deeply suspicious, doesn't it? Doesn't it suggest a failure to properly investigate safety standards? Maybe shifting blame away from the yard owner, Bill, or the system?
That's precisely the implication the sources leave us with, I think. Inquests back then often preferred simplifying complex industrial accidents, especially if they involved powerful local figures like Bill, the diamond courier who owned the yard.
Right.
Blaming self-neglect just neatly closes the case, annoying the reporters who'd apparently hoped for something a bit more scandalous. It's pretty sad commentary on the price of a working man's life at the time.
And the coroner, Mr. Chalice, apparently dealt with Cathmore's inquest immediately afterward, linking Harrison's name to both reports, just compounding this local atmosphere of doom.
Yeah, a double blow in every sense.
So Patience's world, already shattered by losing her husband and the specter of her stepfather's involvement in a boy's death, was about to receive the ultimate personal betrayal, really.
Her mother, Hester, had been unwell for over 2 weeks with these strange, entrenched symptoms that just defied easy explanation.
What kind of symptoms?
They were insidious. A mild sore throat, persistent muscle aches, pain around the groin, and crucially, this non-painful rash appearing on the right side of her trunk. Patients observed that her mother looked 20 years older than her true age, just a sign of rapid systemic decline.
So Patience insisted Hester see Dr. Ralph Wombwell.
Yes, who delivered the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it was devastating. Syphilis. A sexually transmitted disease.
Oh, no.
And what makes this revelation so excruciating is the immediate connection it creates across Hester's history. It links the trauma of her present marriage straight back to the darkness of her past.
How so?
Hester immediately realized the source had to be her saucy widower husband, Harrison, stemming from his unfaithful whoring days, as the source puts it.
Right.
But the immediate shame and horror weren't just about the current infection. The realization linked back to a wound a decade old. Her first husband, Patience's father, Rollo Masters.
Yes.
He had died in agony back in 1913 from liver complications that led to aspiration pneumonia, an illness often associated with tertiary syphilis.
So Hester was faced with this crushing realization that she had potentially contracted the disease from Harrison, who himself had likely contracted it years ago, maybe even infecting his first wife, Margaret.
It seems likely. But perhaps more painfully, she realized the disease paralleled the suffering and death of the man she truly loved, Patience's father, Beola. The symmetry must have been unbearable.
And the emotional burden of contracting syphilis, which carried just immense social stigma and shame in the 1920s, made confrontation impossible for her.
Exactly. She was incapable of facing Harrison with this devastating truth. Her despair was absolute, and in a moment of utter finality, Hester chose suicide.
She acted quickly, didn't she?
Very. She left Harrison's house at number 2 Candidate Row and walked just 2 minutes to the salt marsh, the very same place where Patience had recently been waiting in the dark, hunting that life-saving squirrel-eye herb under the gibbous moon.
God, the irony. The sources use this location deliberately, don't they, to underscore this profound shift from life-seeking to death-seeking.
It's powerful. Her method was deliberate, almost ritualistic. She chose a clump of stones, large enough to fill her pockets for ballast, ensuring she would sink quickly.
And she removed her small black shoes, leaving them on the shoreline. A stark visual clue for the police later.
She began wading into the freezing Thames water. The sources track her final moments with agonizing detail. She paused when the water reached her knees, then again when it touched her nipples, pausing specifically to intone the Lord's Prayer.
It's just a horrifying act of religious defiance and despair rolled into one.
It really is. She was driven forward by what the account terms an anti-life dynamism, this powerful fatalistic impulse. Yet in those final freezing moments, the shock of the cold and the sheer horror of her action apparently broke through.
Really?
Her final thought was a realization. What she was doing was wrong. So very wrong. But the water, cold and unrelenting, abducted her spirit before she could act on that final, terrifying flicker of regret.
So, Hester's suicide, coming right on top of his son, Bram's sudden, gruesome death and the guilt from the Traveler Boy's fall, it just completely shattered John Harrison.
Utterly. Already struggling with fever, his untreated syphilis seems to have metastasized into full-blown psychosis. He just lost his grip on reality entirely.
And the central manifestation of his delusion was the return of his long-dead first wife, Margaret.
Yeah, she wasn't just a memory anymore, was she? She became his constant, invisible companion, actively arguing with him, egging him on, driving him to repeatedly and chaotically intrude on Patience's already fragile home life.
The narrative describes this genuinely bizarre, curious, three-sided conversation. Harrison would talk to Margaret. Margaret would apparently argue back, and Reverend Featherstone, his friend, would just watch helplessly.
Imagine the Reverend sitting there, watching this respected former mariner argue fiercely with thin air about, I don't know, historical injustices or maritime policy or something. It must have been incredibly taxing, like watching a silent movie of a divorce trial unfold, maybe.
Yeah, deeply unsettling. Featherstone and Dr. Womwell quickly liaised, didn't they? Realizing Harrison was becoming a danger to himself and others.
They did. And the final straw for Patience was this chaotic, violent intrusion into her home. Harrison, totally detached from reality, burst in on a seance she was holding and completely upended the table.
To seance. We'll get back to that.
Yes. Exhausted and, frankly, terrified, Patience finally agreed to sign the legal documents to have him committed to an asylum. Muddling was the intended destination mentioned.
But before the commitment could actually happen, Harrison just left Purfleet.
He did. He traveled to Paddington Station and bought a return ticket to Penzance, his childhood home, paying with a crisp £5 note. This journey, though seemingly driven by an inner compelling voice, actually provided him with a temporary, profound return to lucidity.
Really?
Yes, and connection with the sea, the only true solace he ever seemed to find. It was, in a way, his last true act of self-determination.
Meanwhile, back in Purfleet, the aftermath of Hester's death pushed Patience to her absolute limit.
It did. 2 days after her mother died, Patience, heavily pregnant and just overwhelmed by insurmountable sorrow, attempted suicide herself.
Ow.
She used thick twine, intending to hang herself from the brass ceiling rose hook in her parlor.
Oh, Patience, this is where Harry, the postman, steps from the shadows and into the role of savior, isn't he?
Exactly. Harry was secretly listening through the thin lath and plaster wall separating their houses.
He was listening.
Yes, the sources describe this as a regular habit for him. He's painted as a decent man whose repressed sexual needs and inability to communicate effectively with women led him to this, well, deviant use of his hearing.
Wow. Okay.
It's a powerful narrative moment, though. Harry, who was emotionally tongue-tied and isolated, suddenly found himself observing this life-or-death scenario unfold next door. He saw a violent flicker of a swaying body burst through the wall.
Burst through the wall?
Apparently so, and saved her life, calling Dr. Wombwell immediately. His secret shame ironically became the mechanism for Patience's salvation. It's quite something.
That's incredible. So as Patience recovered, she was drawn into the world of spiritualism and mysticism. That seance Harrison interrupted.
Yes. She befriended a woman named Nora Drummond. Nora was described as a fiery, red-haired Scottish medium. Pragmatic, apparently, but with undeniable talent.
How was her talent established?
Well, through surprising accuracy. She correctly named Harry's dead Aunt Eleanor, and apparently described specific, tailored damage on his pullover, things she couldn't reasonably know.
Okay, so maybe some genuine ability there.
Perhaps. However, Nora wasn't just talented, she was also mercenary. The sources mentioned she'd been forced out of the Blooms' tea house in Grays for stealing previously. So she used her gift strategically, it seems, to gain financial leverage over Patience.
How did she do that?
During a reading, Nora confirmed Harrison's syphilis, accurately describing the source as a harlot in Bombay thousands of days ago, which must have given her enormous credibility with patients.
Wow, that's specific.
But the true bomb was the revelation about Patience's late father, Biola Masters. Nora stated clearly that Biola Masters was deliberately poisoned. Murdered. Yes. And this information wasn't offered freely. Nora immediately blackmailed Patience for £100 to keep the revelation quiet.
Blackmail. So Patience is dealing with grief, pregnancy, her stepfather's madness, and now a medium demanding money for a secret about her father's murder.
Exactly. The pressure is just unbelievable. So, faced with this claim of a murderer in her past and a blackmailer in her present, Patience needed confirmation, didn't she?
Understandably. She inherited Hester's belongings, including a coffer marked H. Merriweather, which contained her mother's diaries starting around 1908.
And what Patience uncovered? Well, it turned her stomach. She became physically nauseated as she read, realizing the unthinkable.
Which was?
Her father, Biola Masters, had sexually abused her, starting when she was only 5 years old.
Oh my...
He had commanded her to never speak of their private time. And her mother, Hester, either frozen by fear, shame, or maybe social constraints, had been incapable of intervening.
This revelation of profound generational betrayal and violence, the very foundation of her childhood, it makes the subsequent diary entry understandable, doesn't it? Though morally horrifying.
It does. Hester's tone apparently shifts dramatically in the diaries, from victimhood to that of a cunning, low miscreant of means. Patience found one dominant, shattering sentence confirming Hester had poisoned Biola Masters back in 1913.
Poisoned him. We have to pause here just to acknowledge the complex moral landscape. Hester, the victim of her husband's infidelity and carrier of his disease, becomes the perpetrator of his death, but because he was abusing their daughter.
Exactly. And the sources suggest Patience, the herbalist herself, knew the agonizing symptoms of her father's death weren't natural. That agonizing suffocation as his lungs filled with bloodied water, it wasn't simple pneumonia. This was a sophisticated use of poison.
And Hester's herbal knowledge provided the sinister means, right?
Yes, precisely. Hester knew how to distill and use toxic substances. The sources don't name the specific poison, but something like hemlock, which contains the highly poisonous alkaloid conine, fits the description.
How does conine work?
It acts by paralyzing the motor centers of the body, including the respiratory muscles, crucially, while leaving the mind utterly unaffected until the very last moments.
So Hester didn't just kill her abuser husband, she potentially trapped him in his own body, fully conscious as he suffocated, mimicking the symptoms of aspiration pneumonia. That's chillingly calculated.
It is. For Patience, reading this brought this conflicting, powerful cocktail of emotions.
Yeah.
Immense relief, perhaps, that this deserving death had occurred.
Right.
Mixed with what the source calls murderous disappointment that she hadn't finished the job herself years later.
That's quite a reaction. This realization must have fundamentally ruptured Patience's core values, forcing her to redefine what morality and justice even meant.
It seems so. She didn't condemn her mother. Instead, she found a profound forgiveness for what you did, and the high price Hester ultimately paid, contracting syphilis and committing suicide. It was this emotional reckoning, really, that allowed her to reconcile with her mother's actions, and by extension, begin healing her own trauma.
And this internal shift profoundly changed her relationship dynamics, didn't it, with Harry and the outside world?
Yes, it seems to have been pivotal. While Patience was wrestling with this inherited secret and the blackmail demand, John Harrison made his final trip home.
Returning from Penzance.
Yes. He broke his ankle badly at Purfleet Station. Dr. Woonwell found him surprisingly lucid, actually, and sent him back to number 2. Harrison died peacefully in his sleep soon after, or perhaps in that liminal state the source describes as between consciousness and coma, while the nurse, Nurse Radcliffe, was briefly away.
So his death, hastened by syphilis but ultimately a quiet, natural end, provided the final closure for this devastating period.
It seems so. And during Harrison's final journey home, Patience went into labor.
Right, with Polly.
Exactly. She delivered her daughter, Polly, though interestingly, she refused to allow Harry to be present, apparently due to the powerful, judgmental presence of a Mrs. Barrow, the local busybody.
Ah, village light.
Indeed. The final scene described in the sources is incredibly powerful, though. Patience, holding her new baby, Polly, walked over to number 2 Cannonade Road to see Harrison's corpse.
Really? With the baby?
Yes. She found Woomwell in the hallway, confirming the death. She went upstairs, stood next to the man who had infected her mother, apologized to him for being late, and offered her final, silent farewell to Hester's spirit, confirming her forgiveness.
Wow. That's closure.
And Polly's birth, this symbol of new life, was marked by a striking physical detail. She was born with bright, perfectly formed emerald eyes.
Emerald eyes.
Harry, terrified but steady, was eventually allowed to visit and hold the baby, who was named after his deceased mother. Their new relationship, forged in this crucible of shared trauma, Harry's act of salvation, his listening, their newfound intimacy, was now secured, supported by Polly's arrival. #tab outro.
So we have completed our deep dive into this incredibly intense 6 months of 1923 in Purfleet, a period defined by such a concentration of loss, Cathmore, Bram, and Hester, culminating in the quiet end of John Harrison and, thankfully, the vibrant new life of Polly. Patience, through all this darkness, somehow found a path to ultimate survival.
She really did. She secured her financial freedom, interestingly, by inheriting Harrison's 2 bank accounts. The solicitor, Mr. Joy, deemed it not a huge amount, apparently, but it was transformative for Patience.
Right.
She paid the 100 pounds blackmail demand to Nora, neutralizing that threat, and then, quite swiftly, embraced modernity.
Oh, so?
The sources close with this image of her moving forward decisively. She was apparently the second person in Purfleet to purchase an electric refrigerator, a flat toaster, and an electric griddle. She even replaced Harrison's old wood-burning range with a superb new gas one.
Wow, embracing the future.
Exactly. She and the dependable Harry, the postman who listens, are starting a life together, deliberately putting the darkness of the past behind them in its new, electrically lit age.
Patience survived the abuse, the suicide attempts, the double tragedy, and the knowledge of murder, forging a life of security.
She did. But considering her own childhood trauma and the fact that her mother's secret action, the murder of her abuser, was a direct response to that trauma, we have to ask, don't we? What unintended consequences might her new daughter, Polly, face from the legacy of her mother's desperate, violent choices?
That is the ultimate question left hanging by these meticulous sources, isn't it? Polly is the symbol of new life, born with those bright, perfectly formed emerald eyes. But knowing the deepest secrets always find a way to shape the next generation. Well, what truths are we choosing to hold that may define the path of those we love? And will Polly's future truly be free of the dark legacy, perhaps reflected in those inherited emerald eyes?
It's certainly food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.